Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm sure your brain is fried. We will try to, well, no, I am going to be challenging you today, so apologies if your brain blows up after this session. I'm Charlotte Lair, a strategist at Lyrasis, and joining me today are Emily Farrell from MIT Press and Linnell White from the University of Michigan Press. And we are going to talk about how both of these respective presses what they have learned in the last year and how they perceive the future. And this is because, and I'm going to read this so I say this all very correctly. In 2019, this year, MIT Press and University of Michigan Press launched their own ebook collections for direct sale to libraries. Nearly a year has gone by, and this is actually a part 2 of a session that was done last year with Terry Ailing from MIT Press and Charles Watkinson from the University of Michigan Press. We wanted to address it again. I'm sure some of you who are following that want to hear the story. Where are we now? So as we move on, I want to go ahead and get the takeaways out there because I want to get our minds set so you kind of get an idea of what we want you to take with you. 1, university presses are fast becoming hubs of innovation and are poised for rapid transformation. 2, libraries and university presses should address challenges and guide future directions for scholarly communications collaboratively. And combine all of those. 3, it is possible for libraries to support the vital work that small mission-driven publishers do in the service of scholarly communication and the world at large. I will have the slide up again later, and of course the slides will be shared. So let's look back. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the motivations behind doing all of this. We will bring everybody up to the same the level playing field and understanding so you have some context. We want to spend more time talking about challenges that they've been having to deal with and as well as future prospects perhaps. If you do want to dig in, I'm very excited that a couple days ago the latest Charleston Voices book had just been published, and there's a chapter in there that was done by representatives of Duke, Michigan, and MIT to talk about this in much more depth. So I encourage you to go in and read this to learn a lot more. So for now, what we're going to do is we're going to let Emily and Linnell talk, because you don't need to hear me. I do want to explain, I want to give them a level playing field. Presses, just like libraries and consortia, are all snowflakes. And I want you to give you an understanding of how they are similar and how they are different. And one way we are doing that is using It Takes a Village guidebook. This is a guidebook for open source software sustainability, particularly for programs serving cultural and scientific heritage. This is a template of 4 facets that are used to determine where you stand in sustainability. And so we thought this would be a good way to look at both of these presses. So that explains this. But I will now move things over to Emily.
I'm gonna do that.
Go ahead.
Just kind of there. All right, I feel like that's a little better. So just quickly to talk about where we sit in the press ecosystem, in the publishing ecosystem, and how we work in these different spaces. To start off with, we're a press that reports to the library, so we're reporting to MIT libraries, and we work with the institute in all manner of ways. We have a management board, for instance, that is comprised of people from MIT, but also people outside of MIT. And likewise, we have an editorial board that's comprised of MIT faculty. So there is a lot of interrelation between the library that we report to, but also the institute more broadly. Technology-wise, MIT Press has, for a small press, been, I think, remarkably innovative in an early innovator in the digital publishing space. We launched CogNet in 2000, and it was a very early database in the cognitive sciences, and still holds an important place in the cognitive sciences. We have our ebook platform. We'll be talking about that a bit more. So we've taken more control in terms of how we are delivering ebooks, and we're also looking at further ways to innovate and evolve. One of the projects of the press has involved developing the Knowledge Futures Group. Heather Staines is in the audience if you have questions about that. We won't talk about it much, but it's another way that the press is looking at how can we look forward, how can we look at the future of scholarly communication and publishing, and for university presses in particular. In terms of resources, we have an increasingly varied collection of resources. We still, of course, do a lot of traditional scholarly monograph publishing, but we have an increased trade list. We work with a large variety of partners. We distribute some even smaller presses, some very small presses that we distribute in print, people like Stranger Tractor Press, and that diversifies the income streams that we have. But we also, as a non-profit, have the opportunity to apply for grant funding for different sorts of projects and for business development. So we've just received an Arcadia Foundation grant that gives us a chance to work on open access. So that's a 3-year project to develop an open access monograph business model. We also broadly do a lot of community engagement with open access, with the university press community, and we also we don't yet have, but are looking at the possibility of developing a library advisory board to have a broader connection to the library community. Oh, there's more.
There's more.
Still me. So why ebook? Why an ebook platform? Why another platform? I know that there are quite a few other university press folks here, which is good to see. And also, I know that there are other presses that have recently developed a platform. So not just Fulcrum and Direct, but Manifold, Raven Space. There are all sorts of fantastic things going on in the digital space that university presses are taking control of. And one of the reasons that we decided to do a platform is to sort of do something of a reset, to take back control of assets where, in general, for digital, we have worked through aggregators. There are many benefits of working through an aggregator. There's certainly a much greater reach. Libraries are able to work centrally in a single or smaller number of places to get a large number of presses and their content. But for us, it makes it difficult in terms of what we see, what sort of data we get on usage, for instance. The reporting we get from different aggregators is very different, and different levels of sort of granularity, which can be very difficult in making assessments on what's going on with our program out there in the digital space and with libraries. So it gave us a chance to sort of step back a little and take control of it. Having that control also meant that we have a greater chance to experiment in certain ways. We can think about new models, we can consider how we are relating to open access, for instance, or different sorts of approaches to funding and sustaining low-use scholarly monographs as the publishing ecosystem changes. We can consider new functionality on our platform. We also wanted to launch a platform because it relates to our mission alignment. We're able to make sure that we are aligned to the right sorts of principles that align with not just our library and institute, but other institutions. And more than anything else, it means that we have direct relationships with libraries that we just didn't have a chance to have before. Certainly we've worked with libraries a lot, but being able to sit down, have conversations, to hear about what the difficulties are of managing multiple platforms, and then taking that back, we have, I think, one concrete example. We continue to have a very quick but very beneficial once-a-week meeting about our platform. All of the different stakeholders that work on the platform at the press meet together, half an hour. I get to hear what the problems are with MARC record loading and where the hurdles are for different people in the team. And that to me is very, very, very beneficial when I sit down with a librarian and they ask me why we don't have updated MARC records on the platform, or such things. Not that we don't, we do. They are, right? They're updated. So those relationships, I think we knew that going in, launching our own platform, that would be extremely beneficial, and it's been fantastic to see in this year that that has indeed been the case, and it has been more productive than hoped for. So.
Very good, thank you. Definitely, it's been a long year. I'm just thankful that we made it through, we're doing it. And I'm happy to see a lot of colleagues in the audience from presses, but also fellow publishers and companies that are working through the content and delivery of ebooks. So this is definitely, from Michigan's perspective, a community opportunity and a community problems to solve. So this is very much in line with how we think about the entire ecosystem of ebooks. So it takes all of us to really work on this. At Michigan, we are, just like MIT, we report through the library in a different way in respects to the role that we play in the library. Charles Watkinson is not only our Director of Press, but also our AUL for publishing. And that means that our goals and our missions cascade down from library, including our values and mission. So we are very much embedded in the library as a library publisher. Fulcrum, we work in partnership with Lyrasis and other community partners to do work. We do have a steering committee that runs Fulcrum and hears from our community members as well as our clients increasingly. And of course, we have a press faculty executive committee to review and do peer review and work through the press, kind of more in a traditional way that you would expect a press to publish books. Technology-wise, I mean, this is really, I think, an important part to consider in your publishing environment is the infrastructure and the assets that you bring, including the talent and teams that you work with. University of Michigan has traditionally had a very rich library culture of IT development, and that includes things like the Hadi Trust, the Text Creation Project, early English books online. So it is a continuation of a longer heritage of working with monographs and understanding the publishing digitally. We're working through, but also again, exploring, like you mentioned earlier, exploring new models for monograph development, including Tome and others. And with publishing within the Fulcrum community, it's been about leveraging some of the more established library research infrastructures like Simvera, and also working through the open source opportunities and integration. So we consider these parts of the resources that we have access to as the partnerships we can work through, like Able Player, Leaflet, Manifold, and others. So we just don't see our institution as the primary infrastructure. There's a secondary infrastructure in the community that we work with to do publishing. Although it does take grant funding, you know, and other resources kind of working together in partnership. You know, Fulcrum was kind of born in the Mellon investigation around ebooks and the future of the monograph, and looking at the typology of what we're seeing coming through scholarship. So very much in line with a lot of the work that the larger community was discussing. And in terms of community engagement, I think this is an area where I think a lot of work we do can be expanded. We're exploring models, right? We have, you know, engagement through our accessibility user groups and through Lyrasis in terms of our leader forums, but there's always more work we can do informally and formally with communities. So I think that's an area of rich debate right now, is how best to govern, how best to include community, both from the software side, but also from the collection side, and be equitable in our and diverse and inclusive in our model that we do. What kind of the impetus for us going direct, as you would say, is four things really. And first and foremost, it's about being mission driven. This is, like I said earlier, an extension of the work we were currently doing in the library. I think naturally fits into kind of us being a library publisher. Something that we really hope through working through kind of the Charlotte principles and also through the accessibility work that we do is that it's about creating this collection through a library with libraries for libraries, so much in partnership. We don't see ourselves as a vendor, right? We don't see ourselves as a publisher per se. We see ourselves as a collaborator in developing these collections. One thing that's become clear is that scholarship is changing, and that most scholars now are pretty digital natives. If not now, they will be at least, you know, the next few years, right? So really catalyzing that readership creating opportunities for engagement around scholarship that looks different than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's something that we are planning for and building into the decisions that we make, for example, in Fulcrum. And of course, diversifying our revenue. So print is challenging for many reasons. Digital is coming increasingly part of our revenue, but in a very uneven way. So understanding Amazon and all the ups and downs there, and also kind of riding the waves of consolidation in retail. So there's lots of challenges there, and we would like to be better positioned to diversify our revenue so that we can have a mix of collections, mix of print, some ebooks. So it's nice to be able to spread risk, but also see opportunity across a broader portfolio. And just something I think is a growing conversation we can have is about it being more than a channel or more than a platform, more than a collection, but really thinking more broadly about the expansive health of the entire publishing infrastructure. This is something that I think we might have unique perspectives on, right? What does that infrastructure look like? How open will it be? What are the certain players that need to be involved? But certainly that's something that we're pretty focused on, is just contributing not only to our own collection, but also the health and wealth of the entire ecosystem that we're in.
So when we decided we were going to do this, we got together and we wanted to narrow it down to, what we were calling 3 basic truths, what we've all been learning for this last year. So we're going to outline these 3 basic truths. We're going to, kind of define what they are and then what the challenges are. And we do have some time, so I'm hoping that, you all can expand. So the first one is establish principles. And this is something we all decided. Our principles must be our central reference point. And I'm hoping all libraries, all stakeholders out there are thinking this beyond just presses. We must innovate by taking a values-based approach, not just a solely value-based selection process. And of course, there are challenges to this. There are always tensions to whenever we establish certain principles. One's putting principles into action, another aligning principles with financial sustainability. So whoever wants to tackle one or both, please.
So this is interesting because so part of the idea of having this session this year was to do a follow-up after last year's session, which was very much about looking forward to the launch of a platform, and we've both now had near on a year of has been a very fun-filled, very busy year of plenty of learning experiences. And I think what's also been particularly interesting in talking between the two of us, but also with other presses, is that establishing sort of, for instance, principles and values-based approaches. We can sometimes think that we are on the same page in that regard, and it turns out that we're not. So we do have some interesting conversations, certainly, and maybe we can pick up on some of this about what it is that we may be sharing challenges, but perhaps we're looking at the values in different ways, which I think is quite interesting. But one thing that certainly comes up a lot when we're talking about sort of values-based approaches and principles, the alignment with mission, is I find that we've increasingly over the year been sort of inhabiting that tension between particularly the financial sustainability and the alignment of principles. So what is it to say that we want to try to ensure that we are producing scholarship that we believe is important but that may not be commercially viable, which a lot of presses are doing. We publish a lot of incredibly important scholarship that we believe in, that our editors acquire because they believe it is important, that the researchers that work on it, it's important to them as scholars, but also publishing it is they cannot get a job without doing that, and that we are part of that same ecosystem. But no press is particularly good at knowing for certain how well those books will sell, and the likelihood is now that with monographs particularly, the drop in per unit sales is quite significant for, I think, across the board for all presses. So that alignment of principles of commitment to publishing these works that we know we're seeing drop off of unit sales, but that we must continue to publish because we believe it's important, and we also don't know how important it will be in the future. I mean, in 15 years, depending on what our world looks like, certain types of scholarship that's published now may in fact be absolutely integral. And it's important for us to continue to do that, but we're also working in the commercial market where we need to compete and still be sustainable.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to go ahead and break the seal on these things. I got 4 things.
Okay, you're going to make me look like I was very vague.
I know, it's okay. It's not my mission. Well, I think one of the challenges we had coming from the previous session was actually there's competing definitions of values, right? So we actually have wrestled with this internally at Michigan Publishing is what are the guiding stars of the library's values, right? Like what do they say is a value, right? Versus what say may be a goal or an objective, a business objective. Do we have design principles on Fulcrum, right? So are those the values by which we would work within? So we've got about 10 or so principles/design values, and I think it's important for when we talk about, hey, we're values-based as a press, we deliver value. I think we should be better partners to our community and actually define better what those might be, right? And like just to say what's distinct about a Michigan value versus an IT value. Or for example, how far do we go, right? So we grapple with accessibility. It's like we value accessibility. Well, so I'm sure you all do too. But like, how far do we go to fulfilling that commitment? How is it just as far as libraries will say until they want us to go? Is it about to the financial money runs out and you can't really keep doing it? Is it a further mission? How far do we go? And so I think defining some of those values would be helpful. That's the challenge we've been having, especially. And also radical transparency, right? So there's a call, I think, in the community for transparent deals, more transparency around communicating with libraries and working through deals and working. But how far does that go? I mean, we've had varying experiences with libraries that of different sizes will bring different ideas around what a deal might look like or what discounting might be, and how far what do you do with that? Like some of that might seem like old business, some of it's new business. It's hard to tell what models people are looking for. But I think in the library community, if I was to speak to a library, I'd say you're not making it too easy. You're making it hard for us. Like we're having to, if we do want to go direct with you, we don't want to just replicate what other vendors do all the time. So what unique value can we bring to the deal space or to the deal, essentially. Right, so what we're finding, for one example, is that we put our title list online, we have our pricing online, and that's just very disruptive to sales cycles because there's no trigger now for libraries to say they're interested, everything is available, so a lot of sales folks are like, okay, so when does the selling start? Like, libraries are not engaging the same way they have in the past now when things are open. So it's causing us to rethink engagement, it's causing us to rethink at what point do we need to, what people do we need to talk to in the organization to get engagement going. We don't have the scale, like we don't have like 20 reps, we can't always call you every 5 hours, it's like we're not passing through the region, right? So it's like a different relationship. We need to really super understand what is the trigger for us to engage with you. And I guess we have been, as I think it came out in some of your previous session, Emily, that finding like partners, right? So we have values, you have values, are we the same kind of people? How do we find you quickly? How do we target you? How do we message to you? How do we outreach to you as libraries or as publishers? And that's something that we're having a hard time understanding is how do we align with other institutions? It's not as easy as just like Carnegie class, size, FTE, yes, there's some mission there, we're good. It's a little bit deeper than that now, and we're having a hard time figuring that out quickly. So those are some challenges, I think, in the value space that I've seen.
I don't remember whether we're getting to this later.
Just say it now.
We're in the
with
principles.
spoilers, it's fine.
Something that came up that we talked about in the session just previously that Linnell just mentioned is exactly that, the fact that I mean, it might sound silly to say, but there can be certain assumptions that an R1 institution that is reasonably well funded will definitely invest. And it's been both a wonderful thing to discover that there's a small liberal arts college here, there's a community college there that looks at what we're doing and says, this is what we want to support. We want to support different presses, bibliodiversity, the principles and values that you have as a university press. And also we love the content, we love what you're doing, yes, we're in. So it's been great to see that variety of institutions come on board, invest, care about what we're doing. But it's also been surprising to see where the gaps are and where we need to perhaps have more conversations with sometimes larger institutions that are in a position to innovate because of their size and wealth, but that aren't quite there yet. So why? What do we need to do? What conversations do we need to have? What's not working for them is still something that maybe next year we can talk more about that one.
Well, and we can go ahead and you can tell we're asking questions. We don't necessarily have the answers to these. And so that's because one thing we're all learning together, we must embrace exploration, agility, and humility on this journey. So we act as perpetual searchers and seekers, always novices and beginners. When you have that frame of mind, you're much more open to new ideas. And transformation comes from discovering the right questions more than having the right answers. But there are challenges to this. Finding paths to transformation within our constraints and competing in the market with larger players of greater capacity. So, Linnell.
I think it's interesting that so we're a publisher, but then to have this new vendor kind of designation, right? It's like, it's kind of lamenting a little because it's definitely true, right? So proper customer service, technical support, you're competing against a larger set of players for the same budget, right? So those things are real. And I think that takes some time to develop those partnerships, right? And we become a trusted vendor, become a trusted partner. And also with other vendors, working really closely with them. And even though we're kind of small fish, really. I mean, in the big pond of the world, right? Publishing is a really massive market. Presses are a very small part of the academic scholarly life cycle of this. So we've kind of, I think, if you just define it like in the print world and within libraries, that's a different shift than being in a digital ebook environment, part of a collection, a database, and aggregation. And I think that's been a shift for us is, okay, so now we're not just a publisher, now we might be a service provider or a provider of content, not necessarily monographs, print monographs, right? And that's been changing, and I think some of the work that a lot of folks are talking about in the community now about capacity building and trying to develop like a business acumen and trying to scale, we've been looking at product management models, trying to understand, do we build that capability into our development team, to our marketing team? What is strategic marketing, right? So we don't have the scale to have an entire marketing team per product, per list, we just don't have it. So how do we actually ensure coverage and communications? And the expectations in libraries is one in which we're regularly communicating and updating. There's like a cycle of cadence of communications around product, around development platform, communications, outages. Just there's an expectation that we would be in regular contact and communication with libraries. So scaling to meet that. And also I think one of the biggest challenges is we are in a risk-averse environment, I think. And when do we innovate in some areas and when do we pull back? And I think we're still trying to figure that out. And so some of the portfolio may be digital collections at the moment, and some might be, looking like some lists may not be digital anytime soon, right? And presses have backlists as well. I think the challenge is deciding where to place the investment moving forward. What do libraries want from us? What does one client want versus like 20 clients versus 30 libraries, right? So I think that's a challenge is in a risk-averse environment or really a reduced resource environment. Where do you actually begin to see growth, and how do you invest in growth and feel good about it, reasonably safe?
It's and this is an interesting point where what we're doing as a press is somewhat different than what Michigan is doing, and so we're experiencing some of the similar things, but also different in that we launched MIT Press Direct for our own content, and we're not hosting other university presses' content or other presses' content. But so we're not facing that particular piece of managing, sort of being a broader vendor. At the same time, we do face similar sorts of humbling moments, I would say, in realizing that there are in fact a lot of things that aggregators, for instance, take on for you that you don't see. As much as libraries don't always see what presses do, presses don't always see what libraries do, we likewise don't always see the guts of the work that our aggregators take on for us. So that there are pieces of that we're learning about and that we're building on. I think that we're, again, back to relationships with the libraries. I think we're very fortunate to be able to work with libraries that are, at times willing to even hold our hands through this process. And luckily, it hasn't taken that much hand-holding necessarily, but I do think that there's a lot of support from libraries to sort of make sure we're providing what we should be. And I think that there's a lot of we're quite lucky in that regard in terms of libraries themselves being invested in making sure that we are providing what we should be and what we say we will be and delivering on that. So that's been an interesting process. And I think that was the major point I was going to make. Yes. What else are we going to? I'll come back.
And if I can add just one thing, even a conversation had this morning with a library, taking this idea of being beginners, and we have those gaps, those libraries where we're not necessarily reaching yet. There are some that are, and there are some that are reaching out in deep collaboration. They have issues they're trying to deal with, we are too, and they're willing to help us and we're helping them. So those conversations are happening, and it's actually quite exciting. The last of the three basic truths, and this I am hearing this a lot: take action. We cannot think ourselves into new ways of acting, rather we act ourselves into new ways of thinking. And impactful change will only happen when we take risks, focus on people, and shift from monologue to dialogue when engaging with the communities we serve. I think both of these have been huge basic truths we've learned and will continue to learn. Because there are challenges to this. How do you move from dialogue to action? And then how do you move from that initial action to continual actions? And I read something recently, and very briefly, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but your choices create leverage. But it is your habits or your continual actions that unleash that leverage. A good initial choice can deliver a payoff of 100 times. Like you decide you're going to invest in that OA initiative. However, if you don't convert actions to habits where you continually make those choices over and over again, sustainability, that's another way of saying that, then great choices are just potential energy. That when I read that, it was very powerful to me. And so it gets to these challenges that we're having, but we have to push through. So I'd like to let you guys share your thoughts about this.
Right, I'm going to go first while I remember what I was going to say. So I think that is a really difficult piece of it. The putting values into action, and part of that too is a certain inertia and the difficulty of not only talking about providing support in certain ways, investing in a new platform, but that can take a certain amount of change in approach on the library side, and that's difficult, particularly where you may not have the capacity to switch from working with one vendor to then setting up a new vendor in your system. All those tiny details do actually sort of carry quite a bit of weight, particularly where you're working with different sized libraries that may be under-resourced. And then the other piece of that too is the long-term thinking and sustainability. How do we ensure that we are not just talking about how this functions this year, but how we continue to keep supporting university press publishing within the constraints that are in the market, and how do we keep building on what we've done and take that forward. And I don't think that's a difficult piece. I mean, in talking about the sorts of partners that we have, who we have so far, it's been fantastic, the investment we're seeing, but we also need to continue to build on that and to know how to know what ways we can expand and how to work with our strengths and know that there are limitations that we probably won't be able to move beyond, and that's okay.
We were marking that it's taken about 10 years to just do this again, like Duke did it like years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And then finally, we're seeing, MIT and us come on board, and it's taken time to cultivate these collections. It's just not something that we can do easily. So I know that there is something going on in this behind the scenes to do this work, and I think one of the challenges that we have is defining the types of collaborations that are really effective. I mean, if you're in an open source environment, a partnership initially might look really great, right? And then over time it may change, depending upon the direction of that community, right? To your point about sustainability, right? So initial funding is what it is. How do you build upon that and make it last? So I think shared collaborations between organizations is one of the challenges we're having. In presses, different sizes, you may insource or outsource certain functions in your organization. Those are going to be considerations you'll still have to make, right? Do we do sales inside? Do we bring marketing in? Do we bring marketing out? Do we bring production? How much production out to manufacture this collection? What type of vendors we want to work with? Do we want to take a values-based approach in our contracts, in our negotiations? How equitable do we want to be and transparent do we want to be with those vendors, right? I mean, you can imagine that depending upon your orientation and the way you develop your program, you'll make very different decisions about the collaborations and the partnerships that you make, and those will change the tone or the texture of your offer. Also, we've been grappling with, I think, like in the academic environment. So this is something that maybe a purely commercial vendor may not really need to worry about so much, is this idea that, there's committees in academia, there's committees, there's lots of committees, and there's groups, and there's lots of hierarchical decision-making, and sometimes consensus-driven decision-making, and sometimes it's long-term thinking and frameworks and directions, but never really a firm, you know what I mean? So it's just teasing out the urgency to act in business and have a market-ready solution is something that I think you're going to really see kind of creak under the weight of that, because commercial entities just operate fundamentally differently in their markets. So this is a challenge when we talk about monologue to dialogue, is who are you dialoguing to? Like, are you beholden to your library committee, your scholarship committee, your digital humanities community, or is it the market that you're selling to? One thing that we're increasingly interested in, I don't know if other publishers are doing this or libraries are doing this, is actually leveraging like library practice in our publishing practice, meaning traditionally in product development organizations, commercially, you may have a product team that's developing a product set, and they may or may not collaborate with user-centered design folks or user experience folks, but we are like literally using user-centered design library skills in our product experience design, right? We are using library best practice. So these things are great opportunities, but they also do, again, take some time, and there's different terminology and language and different approaches. And so part of the monologue to dialogue has been, okay, what kind of practice do you bring? What kind of domain experience do you have? How do we actually pull that together? And so there's lots of richness there.
We're just about at time, and here we are getting to the future. So I do want to have at least time for one question, but I'm going to put this slide up here as far as what we're looking at, and I think we should report on a year from now. These are things we're taking into consideration. And opportunities, it's a word came out of Lyra says, Allah, the left feather in the back. But it's the idea of how we need to reposition our challenges as opportunities as they come to us, because you get you started on the right foot when you're approaching challenges that come at you. And so that's how we're viewing the future here. These are the things we're trying to tackle, among all the others that we've already been trying to tackle in the last year. And so does anyone have any questions? You know everything. Probably are thinking a lot, perhaps. And yes, sir.
I mean, if there's one question, is it working? Like, are you going to keep doing it? Like, is there a path to sustainability? If the grant disappears, does it continue? Like, our libraries, once the novelty of this wears off, is it scalable? There's more than 100 university presses. Are libraries going to deal with 100 university press aggregators? How are you different from Muse? Are you going to become Muse? Like, all that, right?
Okay, yeah. She said one question. No, good.
All that, like, if you combine all that, like, is it working?
That's in my head every day, actually.
Yes.
Good.
I think that it has definitely been worth it. In honesty, I was not part of the development. I started the press just after the launch of the platform, so it's been an interesting time to arrive at the press and also to sort of jump on board with what the principles had already been sort of set at the start. I don't imagine that every small press will do this. I don't think it is absolutely not a small undertaking. And I think that most presses are aware of that, and that it's not possible. I think that the idea of collaboration with the community in different ways, and in a diversity of ways is the way forward. So I do think that we're taking on board that feedback from libraries, the immediate, oh no, like not another platform, but can't we just get you through Muse? Can't we just get you through? And so I think that there is, I mean, for us particularly as sort of MIT Press, as a press that doesn't have an endowment, that has to find a sort of financially sustainable way forward, we use the words of diversity in so many different ways to mean so many different types of diversity, but I think that in terms of ensuring financial sustainability, the diversity of revenue streams is a very important piece. And so, we are not just developing and launching an ebook platform, we are doing that in concert with, strategic partnerships with other presses, a journals portfolio that includes, at this point, 11 open access journals that are funded by all sorts of different models, including APC, society funding. So really that analysis of strengths that transforms into a diversity of revenue streams is it. And through that, I think the answer is that yes, the ebooks platform is working, and that it is sustainable, because we will make sure it gets the revenue, even if it has to be subsidized by other parts of the press, right? Because that's where the mission alignment comes in.
And I would say that yes to all of that. That's certainly, as we look broadly at our machine publishing portfolio, certainly there's a lot going on there that we can leverage. I would say that the question is, we're driven mostly by where the scholarship moves. So if scholarship continues to move in this direction, I think you'll expect from Michigan anyway, commitment to following scholarship. So it would be for librarians and publishers, it's like, who are your scholars? What are they doing? And how will you be publishing in 5 years, 10 years? And we're already seeing coming down the pike, ebooks that look a certain way. We want to be able to publish that. So that's the impetus for us. Now, if scholarship changes, it'll be interesting, right? And libraries want to actually support scholarship and faculty publish. So I think it's a really good opportunity for us to be well positioned to support that.
But thank you for asking that bundle of complicated
That's a $1 million question.
That was really Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We'll be up here if you have other questions to ask them. Thank you for taking your time with us today.